The British ocean liner SS Transylvania steamed through the hazardous waters of the Mediterranean. Like thousands before her, she carefully had to navigate the many assailing U-boats and mines that lurked in the waters below. And like thousands before her, she became the casualty of a German ambush. Still, 3,000 out of its 3,300 passengers would live to tell the tale. Their successful rescuers were the Japanese destroyers Matsu and Sakaki. Reflecting on their efforts, Gerald Charles Dickens, a senior officer of the British Mediterranean Fleet, commented, "Whereas the Italians are inefficient, French are unreliable, Greeks are out of the calculation, and Americans are too far away, the Japanese are excellent, but small in number." When the First World War broke out, Japan had become part of the complex network of alliances that spanned the globe. The Meiji Restoration, just 50 years prior, had transformed the land of the rising sun from an isolationist and traditionalist realm into an industrialized, imperialist, and ambitious nation that wanted to achieve equality with the West and assert itself as one of the great powers of its time. Japan's ambitions had already led to conflict with European powers. After defeating China in the First Sino-Japanese War, European empires forced Japan to let go of its conquests, only to take advantage of a weakened China themselves and seize new concessions and leased territories. Humiliated and spiteful, many in Japan realized that they needed a powerful European ally on their side. In 1902, the empire negotiated an alliance with the United Kingdom, mainly aimed at Russia. War with Russia came quickly. To the world's shock, the emerging Asian nation defeated an established European great power. As part of this prestigious victory, Japan gained influence in Manchuria at the expense of the Russian Empire. A decade later, Japan found a new opportunity to expand further into China. After war broke out in Europe, the British asked Japan to help destroy German armored cruisers in Chinese waters. Foreign Minister Kato Takaki was eager to support the United Kingdom. He saw the war as a great opportunity for expansion. If the Navy seized German possessions in China, Japan could trade them with Beijing for influence in resource-rich Manchuria. Joining the war would also benefit Japan's prestige and give it control over German colonies in the Pacific. The Japanese government soon issued an ultimatum to the German Empire: withdraw the fleet from Chinese and Japanese waters and hand over the Chinese colony of Qingdao within a month. Before the deadline expired, Japan formally sided with the Entente and advanced against the largest German colony in Asia. When Japan entered the First World War, its soldiers and sailors found themselves fighting in far-flung places like China, the South Pacific, and even the Mediterranean, with few, if any, chances to write to family and stay connected to events going on back home. Thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Saily, you'll never need to worry about staying connected to your work, your friends, or your family while you're traveling abroad. Saily is a new eSIM service app that allows you to choose from several affordable eSIM plans in over 160 countries and 8 regions. Our production team is international, with some of them traveling often each year. And if you've ever been lost abroad or badly needed an internet connection with no Wi-Fi spot in sight, you'll understand what a difference a local SIM card can make. With Saily eSIM, you'll always have a connection wherever you travel and save money on roaming fees. Using Saily is easy. Simply download the app, buy a plan, and install the eSIM. All plans are compatible for iOS or Android devices. They work with all smartphones supporting eSIM technology and are available at some of the best rates online. Once you download the app and follow the steps to activate your eSIM, you'll be able to easily connect to the local network once you arrive at your destination. Support our channel today by scanning the QR code and get an exclusive 15% discount on Saily eSIM data plans. Download the Sailly app and use code ArmchairHistorian at checkout. The Germans used the time of the ultimatum to prepare defenses, but the force they faced was overwhelming. With a small, poorly equipped fleet and just 5,000 men, they had no hope to hold out against the 68 Japanese warships and 25,000 soldiers that barreled down on them. Bombed, besieged, and blockaded, it took a month for the colony to surrender. This ended the first and last engagement of the Japanese army against Central Powers forces. The Navy took center stage in Japan's military contributions to the Entente war effort. Scattered throughout the Pacific were multiple German colonial possessions. Japanese imperial defense policy saw these islands as valuable strategic assets in a possible future conflict with new imperial rivals, in particular, the United States of America. At first, the government issued strict orders not to attack the German colonies. Their British ally urged Japan to leave the islands alone. Australia strongly wanted to prevent more Japanese influence in the Pacific, out of fear that Japan would use them as a springboard against the country. However, the Japanese Navy ignored the government and seized the German Jaluit Atoll. Although the Navy was ordered to withdraw, their actions empowered a more expansionist faction within the divided government, which soon authorized the assault anyway. Some police units offered token resistance, but the Pacific campaign was over quickly. Over the fall, every single German Pacific island was seized by the Entente. Germany's presence in the region still remained after taking the islands. An isolated part of the Navy, the German East Asia Squadron, was still active. While it tried to find its way back to Germany, the East Asia Squadron disrupted Entente shipping and raided installations and ports. Japan, Australia, and the United Kingdom hunted the squadron for months. Only in March of 1915, off the coast of Chile, was the final ship sunk, although German ships continued disrupting Entente shipping in the Indian and Pacific Oceans all throughout the war. While Europe was distracted, Japan continued expanding its influence throughout Asia. After taking control of Qingdao and Germany's Pacific territories, its next target was the fledgling Republic of China. In early 1915, Prime Minister Okuma Shigenobu sent Chinese President Yuan Shikai a list of 21 demands. While Japan's original plan for China was to trade Qingdao for more influence in Manchuria, the ultimatum painted a different picture. The former German possession would remain Japanese, but the empire would also get new concessions and gain access to China's finance, police, and government affairs. Shigenobu essentially forced China to become a Japanese protectorate. The demands were not received well. After Shikai accepted a watered-down version in May, the Chinese public was outraged. Japanese goods were boycotted. Anti-Japanese sentiment soared, and all across the world, nations voiced their condemnations. The United States was upset with Japan's attempt to violate China's sovereignty and limit international access to its market. Even Japan's closest ally, the United Kingdom, voiced its disapproval. Despite international pressure to lay off China, Japan would continue its imperial machinations to expand its influence over the Chinese mainland. As the young republic descended into a patchwork of squabbling warlord states, Japan would offer financial aid to various cliques in China. Through credits, such as the Nishihara loans, the empire would try to get what it wanted all along: control over Qingdao, concessions in Manchuria, and influence over China's railroads. Although it may be tempting to discredit Japan's role in the First World War as thinly veiled scheming and opportunism, Japan still played a crucial role in supporting the Allied war effort. Its support was instrumental in securing Entente production and logistics throughout the world. Japan not only helped protect convoys in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, but also assisted in putting down revolts against its ally, such as the 1915 Singapore Mutiny. After the United States entered the war, Japan started patrolling the waters around Hawaii so the United States could focus on the Atlantic. Japanese nurses helped in European hospitals, and volunteers enlisted in the French Flying Corps. Starting in 1917, a Japanese naval squadron would be active in the Mediterranean. Still, these ships only came after the British agreed to back Japan's claims on Qingdao and the northern German Pacific Islands. The scale of Japan's contributions to supply and logistics was significant. The Navy escorted almost 800 Entente warships and around 700,000 personnel in the Mediterranean. Especially for the United Kingdom, keeping trade routes open and protected was critical for military success. Japan also played the role of a key Allied supplier. The Brusilov Offensive and the Battle of Verdun used large amounts of Japanese equipment and materiel. As an important supplier and exporter of goods, Japan's economy boomed during the war. Its participation in the Mediterranean theater greatly benefited the quality of its fleet. By working closely with the British, the Empire absorbed a lot of British knowledge and technology for the location, evasion, and destruction of submarines. The Mediterranean Squadron also brought 7 German submarines back to Japan as war trophies, helping Japan develop its own submarine fleet even further. While the Japanese Navy made itself useful throughout the war, the army had been on standby since the occupation of Qingdao. Japan consistently refused to deploy soldiers, which the government wanted to use exclusively for Japan's own protection. Not to mention that the idea of sending soldiers to die far away was very unpopular. But in the wake of a momentous strategic opportunity, that stance changed. By 1917, the Russian Empire had collapsed. The Bolsheviks wanted to take Russia out of the war and turn it into a communist state. Yet large weapon depots were at risk of falling into German hands, and 50,000 Allied Czechoslovak soldiers had become trapped behind enemy lines. Under these circumstances, the Western powers decided to intervene. Reluctant as always, the Japanese government initially refused to join the intervention. The army, on the contrary, saw a new opportunity to expand Japan's sphere of influence. While Japan made up its mind, a British cruiser made its way to the most important Russian port in the region, Vladivostok. This action whipped the Japanese government into a frenzy, fearing they would be left out of a possible joint intervention. The new prime minister, Terachi Masatake, immediately dispatched ships to reach the port first and preempt any unilateral British action. Although the Japanese did reach Vladivostok before the British, they didn't receive a warm welcome. After an armed mob attacked Japanese civilians, Tokyo responded by landing Marines and occupying the entire city. Shortly after taking control of Vladivostok, US President Woodrow Wilson asked Japan to contribute to an international coalition to rescue the Czechoslovak Legion and secure the large stockpiles of weapons and ammunition from Bolshevik capture. The coalition requested 7,000 troops, but Japan went further. The army deployed 10 times that and went far beyond the original plan. The plan was for the international coalition to conduct strategic operations around Vladivostok. The land-hungry Japanese participants pushed as far as Lake Baikal. It also became clear that the Japanese intended to stay. Companies like Mitsubishi set up offices in large Russian cities, and 50,000 settlers flooded into the region. While the international coalition left after the collapse of the anti-communist forces in the summer of 1919, the Japanese stayed put. It took intense international and domestic pressure, as well as an advancing Red Army, to ultimately convince the Japanese army to start withdrawing in 1922. Only by 1925 did Japan completely withdraw from all of its occupied Russian territory. Japan's active expansion into Siberia was still ongoing when the war ended in 1918. Thanks to its efforts, Japan secured a prominent seat at the Versailles Peace Conference, where it tried to reconcile its imperial desires with the new framework of international cooperation. The Japanese approach to the conference was far from united. Throughout the war, Japan's moderate politicians had already been at odds with hawkish representatives of the army and navy. As such, some diplomats argued that Japan should follow Woodrow Wilson's approach to international diplomacy and pursue freedom of trade and navigation, while others argued that proposals like the League of Nations only existed to keep Japan down. Japan ultimately presented itself as a constructive partner in international cooperation. Despite its idealism, the empire still pressed claims out of political and economic opportunism. In the Treaty of Versailles, Japan was recognized as the rightful owner of Qingdao and gained many former German colonies in the Pacific as a mandate territory. Japan also notably pushed for a racial equality clause to the Covenant of the League of Nations. For decades, Japan had wanted to be recognized as an imperial equal by the Western powers. The proposal reached a majority vote, with nations like France, Italy, and China supporting it. However, Woodrow Wilson overturned the result. He stated that a unanimous vote was needed on the matter. The American and Australian delegations especially opposed the proposal. Australia feared that it would kickstart unlimited Japanese immigration to the nation, and senators in the US southern states were unwilling to allow any questioning of race relations. Based on these oppositions, the proposal failed. After the war, Japan emerged as a world power and a permanent member of the League of Nations Elite Executive Council. It had behaved as a reliable ally to the West, although one that always had a selfish ulterior motive. While Japanese democracy and international cooperation would flourish in the war's immediate aftermath, the embers of militarism and expansionism lingered in the shadows. As a fragile peace descended onto the world, fear, paranoia, and economic crises would eventually ignite these embers, pitting an empowered Japan against the new international order within less than 20 years.